There are days when you wonder what your role is in this country and what your future is in it.
In the world says, give me liberty or give me death, the entire white world applauds. When a black man says exactly the same thing, he is judged a criminal and treated like one, and everything possible is done to make an example of this bad nigger so there won't be any more like him.
The story of the Negro in America is the story of America. It is not a pretty story.
Most of the white Americans I've ever encountered, sure, they have nothing whatever against Negroes. That's really not the question. Really a kind of apathy and ignorance. You don't know what's happening on the other side of the wall because you don't want to know.
In America, I was free only in battle, never free to rest.
We need to take action, any kind of action, by any means necessary.
They needed us to pick the cotton, and now they don't need us anymore. Now they don't need us, they're going to kill us all off.
James Baldwin, an American novelist and activist, was very outspoken about the treatment of African Americans and racism during the Civil Rights Movement. Before he passed in 1987, Baldwin was working on a book titled Remember This House, in which he tackled the lives and assassinations of prominent civil rights leaders and his friends: Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Medgar Evans. Baldwin had only finished 30 pages of this book before his passing. I'm Not Your Negro is Raoul Peck's fulfilled version of Baldwin's unfinished project.
Told from the perspective of Baldwin, I'm Not Your Negro addresses the harsh mistreatment of African Americans in the United States and the implications of racial social standings caused by slavery. The stakeholders in this case would be African Americans who sought reparations and equal treatment of their white counterparts, and white Americans who wanted to maintain power by oppressing African Americans from elevating the social and economic standings. While the civil rights issue in itself was addressing the ethical issue of racism, Baldwin addressed specific aspects of American culture that attributed to racism.
The first is the media's depiction of white Americans compared to African Americans, especially on the topic of white heroism. Throughout the 1900s, many films and TV shows portrayed an image of white heroism, in which the only heroes were white males. These heroes could do no wrong. All their unjust actions and mistreatment of others were washed away and written off as a means to an end. With little diversity of heroes, one sends a message that the heroes and all their qualities only come in the form of whiteness, leaving African Americans to be mocked and portrayed as unintelligent, untrustworthy, or savages in most media forms. These portrayals are what fueled racism, promoting the idea that slavery was a necessary evil in order to keep white Americans safe and African Americans in check. This is a pure example of altruistic evil, in which white American filmmakers portrayed African Americans in a horrific light to justify slavery.
The second aspect of American culture Baldwin addresses is the lack of acknowledgement of the mistreatment of African Americans. The United States has often been criticized for its amnesia when it comes to slavery and segregation. The blatant refusal to acknowledge such a prominent era in U.S. history results in the forced notion that African Americans must suppress their rage of their mistreatment and learn to forgive, and a lack of understanding of how the past affects our present and future. Baldwin often verbalizes his taste for how African Americans are criminalized and judged for their anger about their mistreatment, despite their justified reasoning. He states that African Americans have been forced to suppress their anger in order to survive, otherwise their anger will consume them, resulting in their demise. This refusal of acknowledgement also hinders the ability to move forward in a way that corrects and prevents such atrocious acts in the future. Baldwin mentions the idea for any progress to be made, white Americans must reflect on the past to determine if they are only contributing to the continuation of racism in America. This is demonstrated when he analyzes the creation of the N-word.
What white people have to do is try to find out in their own hearts why it was necessary to have a nigger in the first place. Because I'm not a nigger. I'm a man. But if you think I'm a nigger, it means you need it. The question you've got to ask yourself, the white population of this country has got to ask itself, North and South, because it's one country, and for a Negro, there is no difference in the North and the South. There's just a difference in the way they castrate you. But the fact of the castration is the American fact. If I'm not the nigger here, and you invented him, you, the white people, invented him, then you got to find out why. And the future of the country depends on that.
The thing about this documentary is that it made me really think a lot more about what I don't know. And it was really, really eye-opening for me just because growing up, they never taught me a lot about American history or all the different important people that went into the civil rights movement. And I realized that my ignorance became a tool of power for others. And I didn't like that feeling. There's a quote that Baldwin says in the movie, and it goes, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it has been faced. History is not past, it is the present. We carry our history with us. We are our history. If we pretend otherwise, we are literally criminals." That quote made me commit to this principle, which is learn from the past so we can change the future. I want to educate myself better on my history, my country's history, and the history of the systems that I take a part in so I can prevent issues and mistakes we have committed in the past from happening again. I also want to educate others and not let them pretend that certain things haven't happened and that we haven't made mistakes. I refuse to let my ignorance continue to be a source of power for others.
After watching I'm Not Your Negro, I think what I realized most is the lack of moral imagination we use in our everyday conversation. And that was a little bit heartbreaking, I'm not gonna lie. And I also think that if we use a little bit more cognitive empathy, I think that it would invite the let's have a conversation mindset, which would then create openness and openness with others and being open to other cultures and what they have to offer. And I mean, in pertinence to cultures, if we used more conventional relativism, then I think that that's taking the recognition to say that different cultures and different groups have different ways that they process information, different levels of understanding. They have different principles that guide them, and they also have different ways that they make decisions. And that's being open to that and accepting that. Baldwin said in the documentary, "You don't know what's happening on the other side of the wall because you don't want to know." I'm saying here and now that I want to know, and I want to be able to ethically do something about it.
When he went away, the blues walked in and met me. If he stays away, old rocking chair will get me.